My name is Sophia Bennett, and at 28 years old, my own mother slapped me so hard my ears rang, then dragged me by my hair across the polished marble floor of a grand gala hall. She did it in front of 72 of Silicon Valley's most influential figures, the people whose approval she valued more than her own daughter. But the part that truly shattered something deep inside me wasn't the sting on my cheek or the burning in my scalp. It was the sound of my brother, Ethan, his voice cutting through the shocked silence of the room, cheering her on. "You deserved it," he'd said with a smug grin, as if my humiliation was the highlight of his promotion party. No one moved. No one said a word. What they didn't know was that their brutal public performance gave me the one thing I'd been missing: the permission to burn their world to the ground. They had no idea that their cruelty would trigger a single phone call the next morning. A call that would set in motion the complete and total collapse of their billion-dollar empire. How does a girl who was cast out and shamed by her own family become the architect of their downfall? How did I go from being their punching bag to the one holding the key to their destruction? It didn't begin with the violence of the gala or the cold, judging stares of the crowd. It started hours earlier in the sterile, chilling silence of my office on the 40th floor, with the quiet, defiant click of a keyboard and two simple words that would change everything: I resign. The office was a cage of glass and steel, perched high above the glittering sprawl of Silicon Valley. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurred into a river of gold and silver. But inside, the only light came from the cold, blue-white glow of my monitor and the pulsing neon logo of Bennett Innovations reflected in the polished concrete floor. The air was thin and recycled, tasting faintly of ozone and the bitter, burnt coffee someone had left in the pot hours ago. For years, this sterile perfection had been my world, a world my mother, Evelyn, had designed not for comfort, but for control. My hands trembled just above the keyboard, my fingers hovering, refusing to obey. The resignation letter was already written, sitting there on the screen. It was short, professional, devoid of the decade of silent screams and swallowed tears it represented. Every time I looked at it, my mother's voice would echo in my head, a sharp, cutting whisper from 1,000 different memories. "Honestly, Sophia, that design is so pedestrian. Are you even trying? Or, your brother has vision. You have hobbies." Her words were tiny, perfectly aimed needles designed to deflate, to diminish, to keep me small and grateful. A tremor ran from my fingertips up my arm, and I had to clench my fist to stop it, my knuckles turning white. Was this fear or liberation? I couldn't tell the difference anymore. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating against its cage. For so long, I had defined myself by their expectations, molded myself into the quiet, diligent daughter who never made a wave, the talented graphic designer who poured her soul into projects that my brother Ethan would later present as his own. Leaving wasn't just quitting a job, it was an act of treason. It was shattering the carefully constructed image of the perfect Bennett family. I knew walking away would burn every bridge I had, but staying meant letting the last embers of myself burn out completely. Staying meant I would simply cease to exist. I took a deep, shuddering breath and placed my finger on the mouse, ready to hit send. That's when the sound of sharp, impossibly fast footsteps echoed down the hallway. I didn't have to look up. I knew that sound better than my own heartbeat. It was the sound of my mother. The office door slid open without a sound, and Evelyn stood there, framed in the doorway like a predator assessing its prey. She was impeccable as always, in a sharp, tailored black suit that probably cost more than my car. Not a single strand of her dark hair was out of place. Her face, which the media always described as commanding and powerful, was a mask of cold fury. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone sucked all the warmth from the room. Her eyes, the same dark eyes I saw in my own reflection, flickered from my face to the screen, instantly understanding. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked. Her voice was low, dangerously soft, a silken thread of steel that promised consequences. It was the voice she used right before she tore someone's career apart in a board meeting. I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, clogged with all the words I'd never been allowed to say. My gaze remained fixed on the screen, on those two final words. She glided into the room, her expensive perfume filling the space, suffocating me. She stopped beside my desk, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered contempt. "Don't be a fool, Sophia. You think you can just leave?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "This company is your legacy, your birthright. Everything you have is because of this family, because of me." Her legacy, not our legacy. Hers. That one word was a bucket of ice water, washing away the last of my hesitation. It was never about family. It was about control, about ownership. I was just another asset, another part of the Bennett Innovations portfolio. My trembling stopped. A strange, calm resolve settled over me. I slowly raised my head, my spine straightening, and met her icy gaze for the first time without flinching. My hand moved to the mouse, my finger resting on the button. Her eyes narrowed, a silent warning. "Go on, I dare you." I clicked. The message disappeared, sent into the digital ether, a small, almost imperceptible sound in the quiet room, but to me it was as loud as a gunshot. It was the sound of my own freedom. I stood up, my chair rolling back softly. I didn't look at her again. I walked past her toward the door, my legs feeling both impossibly heavy and miraculously light. Her silence was more menacing than any threat. I could feel her stare burning into my back, a physical weight of rage and disbelief. As my hand touched the cool metal of the door handle, her voice cut through the silence again, colder than before. "You will regret this," she whispered. "You have no idea what you've just done." I stepped out of the office and didn't look back. The long hallway stretched before me, lined with the glass walls of other offices, other cages. I felt the eyes of her executive team on me, their faces blurred and indistinct, silent witnesses to my defiance. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in the small, mirrored box, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, and a single, terrifying question echoed in the sudden silence. What would they do to me now? My mother's whispered threat, "You will regret this," hung in the air long after the elevator doors closed. For a few hours, there was only a hollow, ringing silence. I went home to my small apartment, the one place that was truly mine, and stood under a scalding hot shower, hoping to wash away the feeling of her ownership. Part of me, a foolish younger part, wanted to hide, to lock the door, turn off my phone, and disappear. But another, colder part of me knew that wasn't an option. Hiding was what she expected. Hiding was defeat. So I did the one thing I knew they wouldn't expect. I put on a simple, defiant black dress, did my makeup like armor, and went to my brother's promotion party. The gala was being held in the grand hall of the city's most expensive hotel, a cavernous space designed to make people feel small. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto the polished marble floors below. The air was thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of 72 of the most powerful people in tech, their voices a low, predatory hum. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, their smiles as bright and empty as the bubbles in the glasses. I took one, the stem cold against my fingers, my hand steady. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to be seen. I needed them to see I wasn't broken. My inner monologue was a frantic prayer. Just stay calm. Don't let her see you bleed. Then I saw him. My brother Ethan took the stage to a wave of polite applause. He looked every bit the golden boy, his suit perfect, his smile effortless. He thanked our mother, the brilliant CEO Evelyn Bennett, for her vision and guidance. He spoke of innovation and the future, and I had to clench my jaw to keep from screaming. I was the one who had stayed up for 72 hours straight, tweaking the user interface he was taking credit for. My designs, my code, my soul was in that product. And he stood there, bathing in the glory, without a single flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. He was a stranger in my brother's body. As the applause died down, I felt a familiar chill creep up my spine. I turned, and my mother was there, standing so close I could see the tiny, merciless lines around her eyes. She held her own champagne flute like a weapon. "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face here," she said. her voice a low murmur that didn't travel beyond the two of us. She took a small sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving mine. "After the stunt you pulled today. Pathetic." I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "I resigned, Mother. I didn't pull a stunt." "You embarrassed me," she hissed. "You embarrassed this family." That's when Ethan appeared at her side, a smug smirk plastered on his face. "Having trouble, Mom? I thought I smelled failure." He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my simple dress. "You look out of place, Sophia. You should have stayed home." The two of them stood there, a united front of polished cruelty, and for a second, I was a child again. I remembered being 10 years old after I'd accidentally broken one of my mother's expensive vases. She'd backed me into a corner in the living room, her face twisted in that same cold rage, her hand raised. Ethan had stood by the door, watching, a silent little soldier on her side. Nothing had changed. And then, an unexpected thought, sharp and clear, cut through my fear. This is what I came for. This is the truth. I didn't come here for peace. I came for the war. I wanted the world to see them for what they were. This was the emotional twist I hadn't admitted even to myself. I wasn't a victim crashing the party. I was a saboteur lighting a match. "I have every right to be here," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. My mother's face hardened. "You have no rights," she whispered. "Not anymore." And then it happened. Her hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. A sharp, stinging crack echoed in the small space between us as her palm connected with my cheek. My head snapped to the side, my ear ringing. The low hum of the party seemed to fade into a muffled silence. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then she grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back with brutal force. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot down my scalp. "Get out of my sight," she snarled, her voice no longer a whisper. She started dragging me toward the exit, my heels scraping against the marble floor. And through the shock and the pain, I heard Ethan's voice, clear and triumphant, cheer out, "You deserved it!" The crowd of 72 guests just watched. They stood frozen, champagne flutes in hand, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and a chilling, calculated indifference. These were my mother's allies, her board members, her investors. Their loyalty was to her power, not to my pain. Their silence was a verdict. She shoved me through the grand doors into the cold night air. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing before I fell. The doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the light and the sound, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening quiet. The slap still burned on my skin, but it was their laughter, my brother's cheering and my mother's snarled triumph that cut deeper than the slap ever could. I stood there, trembling not from the cold, but from the stark, horrifying clarity of it all. I looked out at the empty street, my reflection a ghostly image in the dark glass of the hotel doors, and wondered, would anyone ever stand up for me? Or was I completely, utterly alone in this? The walk from the hotel back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and shadows. I don't remember the cold or the sound of traffic, or how I found my keys. The only thing I could feel was the phantom sting on my cheek and the echo of my brother's voice saying, "You deserved it." My apartment, usually a cozy sanctuary from the sterile glass and steel world my family inhabited, felt different tonight. It felt like a cage, just a smaller one. The air was stale and silent. I left the lights off, letting the chaotic glow of the city outside paint shifting patterns on the walls. I sank onto my sofa, the worn fabric rough against my skin. My body ached with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, but my mind was a hornet's nest. Over and over the scene replayed itself, my mother's face, a mask of cold fury, the silent, watching eyes of the crowd, Ethan's triumphant smile. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. Was this it? Was this my life now? To be the family disgrace, the cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties? My gaze drifted across the cluttered room and landed on a framed photograph on my bookshelf. It was me at maybe 7 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap. He was the founder of the original company, long before my mother twisted it into the ruthless corporation it was today. He smelled of old books and peppermint. His smile in the picture was genuine, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He was the only one who had ever truly seen me. A memory, warm and bittersweet, surfaced through the cold fog of the evening. We were in his study, a room filled with maps and leather-bound books. He'd lifted me onto his knee and said, his voice a low, comforting rumble, "Sophia, my little star, never forget this company was built on creating things, not just acquiring them. One day, a piece of it will be yours to protect. I've made sure of it." He'd tapped a thick manila envelope on his desk. "This is your future, your safety net, no matter what happens." He passed away a year later, and my mother had handled all the arrangements. She'd told me his affairs were complicated, that he'd left everything to her to manage for the family's benefit. I was 16. I never questioned it, no matter what happens. His words echoed in the silent apartment. A new feeling began to burn through the shame, not anger, but a slow, coiling suspicion. I stood up, my movements stiff. I knew exactly where that envelope was. My mother had given it to me years ago, calling it sentimental paperwork, dismissing it as unimportant. I'd stored it in a heavy box at the back of my closet, along with old report cards and childhood drawings. My hands shook as I dragged the dusty box into the middle of the room. The dim light from the window was barely enough to see by. I knelt on the floor, the rough wood pressing into my knees, and pried open the lid. The scent of old paper and trapped time filled the air. There it was, at the bottom. A thick, yellowed manila envelope, my name written on the front in my grandfather's looping, elegant script, Sophia. I pulled out the document inside. It was an inheritance contract, dozens of pages long, filled with dense legal jargon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spread the pages out on the floor. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't need to be. I scanned the pages, my eyes searching for the key clauses my grandfather had mentioned. And then I found it. Section 5, Distribution of Assets. My grandfather's signature was at the bottom of the page, bold and familiar. But something was wrong. Just above his signature was an amendment, a crudely inserted paragraph, written in a different pen, in a different hand. It stated that my shares, my entire inheritance, would be held in trust and managed by the acting CEO, my mother, until such time as my brother Ethan was named her successor, at which point control would transfer entirely to him. My blood ran cold. It was a complete reversal of my grandfather's promise. And there, at the bottom of the amendment, was the signature that sealed the betrayal, Evelyn Bennett. Her handwriting was sharp, precise, and utterly ruthless. She hadn't just emotionally abused me. She had systematically, legally stolen my future. This paper proved it wasn't just about control or favoritism. It was a calculated long-term fraud. This paper proves they stole my future. How far would they go? As I stared at her name, a single sheet of paper, smaller and folded, slipped from between the pages of the contract and fluttered onto the floor. It wasn't part of the legal document. The paper was crisp, modern. The message was typed, not handwritten. It contained only 5 words. She wasn't the only one. I snatched it up, my breath catching in my throat. I looked from the cryptic note to the forged signature. A new, terrifying dimension of the betrayal opened up before me. This wasn't just a family matter. Someone else knew. Someone else had watched this happen. I clutched the forged contract in one hand and the anonymous note in the other, the papers crinkling in my white-knuckled grip. My quest for freedom had just become a hunt for the truth. And my first question was no longer what my family would do to me, but who else was out there, in the shadows, watching. The silence of my apartment was a suffocating blanket. For an hour I just sat on the floor, the forged contract in one hand and the cryptic 5-word note in the other. The papers felt both impossibly heavy and flimsy, a testament to a lifelong deception. My mother's betrayal was a cold, hard fact, but the anonymous note was something else entirely. It was a ghost in the room, a whisper that suggested I wasn't just fighting my family, but a web of secrets I couldn't begin to understand. The question of who else knew burned in my mind, overriding the pain and humiliation. Fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it had a new companion, a sharp clinical anger demanding action. I couldn't do this alone. I needed people who existed outside of my mother's orbit. I needed people I could trust. 2 names came to mind. The coffee shop was one of those forgotten places tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up shoe store. The air inside was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and old dust, a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed world of Bennett Innovations. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows from the worn, cracked vinyl booths. It was the perfect place to disappear. I chose a booth in the farthest corner, my back to the wall, and waited. My leg bounced nervously under the table, my fingers shredding a paper napkin into a pile of white lint. Every time the bell over the door chimed, my heart leaped into my throat. Then he walked in. Marcus Tate. He'd been a senior investigator in our corporate security division, a quiet, observant man who saw everything. He quit a year ago, telling me privately that he couldn't stomach the rot anymore. He spotted me and navigated the cramped space, his movements calm and deliberate. He slid into the booth opposite me without a word. I remember a time at the office when a senior executive was screaming at a junior designer, a kid fresh out of college. Everyone else just stared at their screens, pretending not to hear, but Marcus stepped out of his office, stood between them, and told the executive to back off in a voice so low and steady, it was more intimidating than any shout. He was a man with a moral compass, a rarity in my mother's kingdom. That's why I called him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his eyes scanning my face with practiced assessment. I pushed the manila envelope across the sticky tabletop. My hand was shaking so much I could barely let go. "Worse," I whispered. "I've seen the proof." He opened it and began to read, his expression unreadable. He spent several long minutes studying the forged amendment, his finger tracing my mother's signature. The only sound was the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the soft hiss of the espresso machine. He then picked up the small typed note. He read the 5 words, "She wasn't the only one," and a muscle in his jaw twitched. Before he could speak, the bell chimed again. Claire Donovan walked in, her sharp lawyer's eyes taking in the entire room in a single sweep before landing on our booth. Claire and I had been friends since college, back before Bennett Innovations had consumed my life. She was the one I called after my first big blow-up with my mother over a stolen project idea. Her advice then was simple: document everything. She slid in next to me, her presence a small pocket of warmth in the cold, tense booth. "Okay," she said, her voice all business. "Show me what's so urgent." Marcus passed her the documents. I watched her face as she read. I saw her sharp legal mind processing the implications, her eyes narrowing as she took in the fraudulent signature. She let out a low whistle. This is dynamite, Sophia. Forgery, breach of fiduciary duty. This is a company killer if it's real." "It's real," I said, my voice barely audible. "My grandfather promised me." For the first time since I walked out of that office, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited inside me. Seeing them here, their faces grim but resolute, made me feel less like a girl who'd been cast out and more like a woman building an army. It was a startling, unfamiliar feeling. With them, I might actually win this war. Claire looked at Marcus. "Can you prove the forgery?" "It'll be tough," Marcus admitted, his gaze fixed on me. "Your mother controls everything, every record, every witness." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "You need to understand, Sophia. She's got eyes everywhere. Be careful. Her network is vast. People you think are your friends will report back to her for a sliver of her favor. We're not just going up against a CEO. We're going up against an intelligence agency of one." His words were a splash of icy water, extinguishing my brief moment of hope. The weight of my mother's power, her almost mythical reach, settled back over me. Claire tapped the contract with a perfectly manicured nail. "He's right. A promise from your grandfather isn't enough in court. Your word against hers isn't enough." She looked me straight in the eye, her expression firm but not unkind. "We'll need proof they can't twist. Something undeniable. Financial records, internal communications, anything that proves the intent to defraud you." My newfound strength wavered. The mountain ahead seemed impossibly high. How could we find proof inside a fortress when the Queen knew our every move? I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe I was a fool. But then I looked at their faces, Marcus, the quiet protector, Claire, the sharp-witted fighter. They hadn't run. They were here. They believed me. A flicker of strength born of their conviction pushed back against the fear. The despair receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They were right. I couldn't fight with just my pain. I had to fight with facts. I had to dig deeper. My gaze fell on the cryptic note still lying on the table. Someone else knew. And if they knew, they might have the proof we needed. I left the coffee shop with a fragile, double-edged feeling swirling in my gut, a sliver of hope, wrapped in a thick blanket of fear. Marcus's warning echoed in my head all the way home. She's got eyes everywhere. The words transformed the familiar city streets into a hostile landscape. Every person I passed on the sidewalk felt like a potential spy. Every dark car idling at a light seemed to be watching me. By the time I reached my apartment building, my newfound resolve had worn thin, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of paranoia. I just wanted to get inside, lock the door, and pretend for one night that I was safe. My apartment was on the 3rd floor at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The air was still and quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the building's ancient ventilation system. As I approached my door, my hand already digging in my purse for my keys, I felt a faint draft. It was odd. The hallway was usually stuffy and airless. I slowed my pace, a prickle of unease crawling up my neck. That's when I saw it, a small, crisp white envelope lying on the worn welcome mat. It hadn't been mailed. It hadn't been slid under the door. It had been placed there, deliberately. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I just stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. My name wasn't on it. There was nothing on it at all. It was anonymous and unnervingly clean. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I thought of the note from my grandfather's contract, the one that said, "She wasn't the only one." Was this from the same person? A hidden ally offering more help? With a trembling hand, I bent down and picked it up. The paper was cool and smooth, almost slick to the touch. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers clumsy and numb, and finally got the door open, practically falling inside. I slammed it shut behind me, my back pressing against the solid wood as if it could protect me, and tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The words were typed, just like before, in a clean, sterile font. But this message wasn't a cryptic hint. It was a cold, direct command. "Stop now, or you'll regret it. The Watcher sees everything." The air rushed out of my lungs. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. The Watcher. The word was a violation, an icy hand gripping my heart. It was one thing to know my mother had influence, that she had a network of corporate spies. It was another thing entirely to have it confirmed by a stalker who could get to my front door. The hope I'd felt just an hour ago curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. This wasn't an ally. This was a threat. The person who knew my mother's secrets wasn't trying to help me. They were trying to silence me. Who were they? A Bennett Innovations executive terrified of being exposed? A third party playing some sick game? Or was it my mother herself, using this phantom watcher to terrorize me into submission? My mind raced, a chaotic spiral of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock it. I had to tell Marcus. I had to tell Claire. I snapped a picture of the note and sent it to them in a group message, my thumbs fumbling on the screen. "Just found this outside my door." Marcus's reply came back in less than a minute. "Don't touch it again. Don't open the door. I'm on my way." Claire's followed immediately after. "He's right. Lock your deadbolt. Call 911 if you hear anything. Anything at all." Their swift, serious responses only amplified my fear. This was real. This wasn't just family drama anymore. I rushed through my small apartment, checking the flimsy locks on my windows, pulling all the blinds shut. The familiar space, my only refuge, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards from the apartment above sounded like footsteps outside my door. The low hum of the refrigerator sounded like a whisper. The Watcher. The word pulsed in my brain. Who's watching me, and why now? Was this because I'd met with Marcus and Claire? Did they know about our plan already? My anger, the righteous fury that had been my fuel, was momentarily extinguished by a wave of paralyzing fear. They wanted me to stop. Maybe I should. Maybe this was a fight I couldn't win. What was I doing, taking on an empire with nothing but a forged document and 2 friends? This was insane. But then I thought of my grandfather's kind eyes, of my mother's cruel slap, of Ethan's sneering face. The anger returned, a hot, defiant surge that burned away the edges of my fear. No, I wouldn't stop. I couldn't. I walked to the front door and slid the deadbolt across. The sound of the lock clicking into place was deafeningly loud in the silence. It was meant to keep them out, but in that moment, I felt like I had just locked myself in. I stood there in the dark, my arms wrapped around myself, and stared at the door, wondering who the shadow was, what they knew, and what they would do to me when they realized I wasn't going to back down. The 2 days after the threat appeared on my doorstep were a special kind of hell. I lived in a state of heightened, nerve-shredding paranoia. Every floorboard creak in the hallway was the watcher coming back. Every unknown number on my phone was a new threat. I kept the blinds drawn, living in a self-imposed twilight, and existed on stale crackers and lukewarm tap water because I was too terrified to open my door for a food delivery. Sleep offered no escape. It was a landscape of nightmares where I was endlessly pursued through the glass hallways of Bennett Innovations, my mother's laughter echoing from all directions. Fear was a poison, seeping into my bones, and I could feel my resolve crumbling into dust. I was close to breaking, close to giving up. Then, on the 3rd morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. It was just an address, Claire's law office, and a time, 4 p.m., be there. No explanation, no context. But it was enough to pierce through the fog of my fear. Claire's office was the complete opposite of my mother's corporate palace. It was a small, cluttered space on the 2nd floor of an old brick building, smelling of paper, dust, and microwave popcorn. Books and legal files were stacked in precarious towers on every available surface, threatening to collapse at any moment. The only clear space was her large wooden desk, where 2 monitors hummed, displaying dense walls of text. It was a room dedicated to fighting, a chaotic but honest space that felt safer than my own locked apartment. Claire gave me a quick, concerned hug, and Marcus offered a grim, steady nod. "We got something," Marcus said, his voice low. He didn't waste any time. He pulled a small, black USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the desk between us. It was tiny, ordinary, and yet it seemed to thrum with a dangerous energy. The tip came from an anonymous encrypted source, untraceable. "I think it's your watcher." My blood ran cold. "The person who threatened me is helping us?" "Or trying to control the game," Claire countered, picking up the USB drive with a pair of tweezers from her desk drawer. "Let's see what they're playing with." She plugged it into her computer. My heart hammered against my ribs as she navigated through encrypted files. For a moment, there was nothing but lines of code. Then she found it, a folder containing dozens of spreadsheets, bank records. She clicked one open, and the screen filled with a dizzying cascade of numbers. Transaction dates, routing numbers, and amounts. So many numbers they blurred together. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. Claire didn't answer for a full minute. She just scrolled, her eyes flying across the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. Marcus stood behind her, his hand resting on the back of her chair, his knuckles white. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft, frantic clicking of Claire's mouse. Finally she leaned back, letting out a breath that was almost a gasp. "Oh, Evelyn," she murmured, "you magnificent, greedy monster." She turned to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and professional excitement. "For the last 3 years, your mother has been systematically funneling money from various departmental budgets, R&D, marketing, even payroll, into a series of shell accounts." She pointed to a column of figures. "Then, from those accounts, she's been transferring the money directly to Ethan. Millions of dollars, Sophia, millions." The words hung in the air, but my brain couldn't quite grasp them. It felt abstract, unreal. Then Claire opened another file. It was the budget proposal for Ethan's big product launch, the one he'd gotten his promotion for. She highlighted a figure at the bottom, the project's funding. Then she highlighted a series of transfers from the shell accounts. They matched, to the dollar. "The entire launch," Claire said, her voice shaking with outrage. The one that made him the company's golden boy? It was a ghost, funded entirely with embezzled money. A memory, sharp and bitter, flashed in my mind. I was in a budget meeting a year ago, pleading for resources for my design team. My mother had looked at me with bored indifference and said, "The numbers don't support it, Sophia. We have to make cuts." 2 weeks later, she announced she was greenlighting Ethan's visionary new project, funding it completely. I remembered the injustice, the quiet fury I'd felt. Now I saw the truth. She hadn't been making cuts. She'd been stealing. From the company. From me. This was it. The proof Claire said we needed. This was the weapon, the one thing they couldn't twist or deny. The realization washed over me, a tidal wave of shock so profound it left me breathless. This could destroy them. It could tear down everything they had built. "This is it," Claire whispered, echoing my thoughts. She looked from me to Marcus. "This is enough to bury them, if we play it right." I stared at the screen, at the cold, hard numbers that laid my family's greatest secret bare. The fear I had lived with for days was burned away by a sudden, volcanic surge of rage. It was a pure, clarifying anger that solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. My pain wasn't just a side effect of their ambition, it was the foundation. They had built his throne with money they stole, with opportunities they denied me. They built his throne with my money, now it's my turn. I looked at the glowing screen, at the endless columns of their crimes, and a single, chilling question formed in my mind. I had the power to detonate their world. How and when do I light the fuse? For a week, the world was quiet. It was a tense, fragile quiet, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was the one in control of the silence. The USB drive containing my family's crimes sat locked in Claire's office safe, a ticking time bomb waiting for our command. We spent our days huddled in her cluttered office, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared, simmering rage. We meticulously built our case, with Claire outlining the legal strategy while Marcus used his skills to dig for more evidence, corroborating the data from the drive. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my mother's cruelty. I was actively planning her downfall. A dangerous sense of empowerment began to bloom in my chest. I felt like a hunter, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I was a fool. I had forgotten that my mother was a hunter too. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in my apartment, the first place I'd felt remotely safe since the threatening note appeared, trying to sketch in an old notebook. The quiet was broken by a news alert buzzing on my phone. It was from a major media outlet, the kind my mother's PR team always fed exclusives to. The headline was a punch to the gut. "Bennett heiress in violent outburst attacks CEO mother at public gala." My blood ran cold. My fingers trembled as I clicked the link. And there it was. A video, already with hundreds of thousands of views. The security footage from the gala. But it wasn't what happened. It was a twisted, monstrous lie. The video started in the middle of our confrontation. It showed me saying, "I have every right to be here," my voice tight with emotion. But they had cut out my mother's preceding taunts. Then, it showed my mother raising her hand, but the video was cleverly edited with a jarring jump cut. It cut away the moment before she slapped me and cut back a split second later, showing my head snapping to the side from the impact. But without the context of her hand connecting, it looked like I had violently jerked my head in a fit of rage. Then came the worst part. They showed my mother grabbing my hair, but they slowed the footage down, adding a dramatic, ominous soundtrack. They zoomed in on my face, my features twisted in pain and shock, making me look unhinged. They completely cut out Ethan's voice cheering, "You deserved it!" Instead, they inserted audio of my mother saying, "Get out of my sight," making it sound like a plea from a terrified parent trying to de-escalate a situation with her unstable daughter. The video ended with me being shoved out the doors, stumbling, looking like the clear aggressor who had been rightfully ejected. I watched it again, my stomach churning. I felt a surreal sense of dislocation, my own memory fighting against the lie on the screen. I flashed back to the real moment, the searing pain of her slap, the sharp yank of my hair, the cold, indifferent faces of the crowd, the sound of my brother's voice cutting through the silence. My real, raw pain had been expertly repackaged and sold to the world as my own insanity. They twisted my pain into their weapon. My phone started buzzing incessantly. It was Claire. I answered, my hand shaking. "I see it," was all I could manage to say. "Don't watch it, Sophia. Turn it off," she commanded, her voice tight with fury. "Don't read the comments. Don't engage." But it was too late. I was already scrolling, a form of morbid self-torture. The comments were a tidal wave of hatred. "Spoiled rich girl. She looks crazy. Classic narcissist, making her brother's night all about her. Good for Evelyn Bennett, not putting up with that abuse." Each comment was a fresh stab of betrayal, not just from my family, but from a world of strangers who now hated a version of me that wasn't even real. My carefully constructed case, my righteous anger, my truth, it all felt like it was dissolving into nothing. My other line beeped. It was Marcus. I switched over, my throat tight. "Marcus?" "It was no accident, Sophia," he said, his voice grim. There was no preamble. "This wasn't a random leak. I tracked the IP address of the original upload. It came from a high-end PR firm in New York, the kind that specializes in reputation management, or in this case, reputation destruction." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "They were hired 3 days ago. This was a professional, premeditated hit. They paid to ruin you." The room started to spin. They knew. They must have known I was planning something. Was it the Watcher? Did they tip my mother off? Or was she simply so paranoid, so controlling that she had this kind of attack ready to launch at a moment's notice? The sheer strategic cruelty of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just reacted. She had invested time and money to methodically, professionally, and publicly assassinate my character. I sank to the floor, my back against the couch, the hateful voices from the TV and the internet filling the silence in my apartment. The empowerment I had felt just this morning was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening despair. My evidence, the bank records, the forged contract, what good were they now? In the court of public opinion, I was already guilty. My mother hadn't just fought back, she had changed the entire battlefield. She'd turned my truth into a lie and broadcast that lie to the entire world. My confidence, once a budding flame, was shaken to its core. How do you fight back against a weapon like that? How do you kill a lie when it's already gone viral? The world had become a prison of noise. For 48 hours after the doctored video went viral, I didn't leave my apartment. I couldn't. The hatred was a physical presence seeping through the walls. I'd turn on the TV, and a panel of pundits would be analyzing my unstable body language. I'd glance at my phone, and a fresh wave of hateful comments would flood my screen. They had turned me into a monster, a caricature of a spoiled, violent brat, and the world had eagerly accepted it as truth. The anger I'd felt in Claire's office had curdled into a thick, hopeless despair. What good was our evidence now? My mother wasn't just going to fight me in court. She had already tried and convicted me in the court of public opinion. She had gaslit the entire world. I remember when I was a teenager, I'd confronted her about giving Ethan credit for a marketing concept I'd developed. She hadn't denied it. Instead, she'd tilted her head, her face a mask of patronizing concern, and said, "Sophia, darling, your imagination is a wonderful thing, but sometimes your memory plays tricks on you. Are you sure you're remembering that correctly?" She'd said it so calmly, so convincingly that for a terrifying moment, I had actually doubted my own mind. This video was the same tactic, magnified 1,000,000 times. It was psychological warfare on a global scale. On the third night, a text from Claire lit up my phone. The coffee shop. 1 hour. The thought of going outside, of being seen, made my stomach clench with anxiety. But the thought of staying here, drowning in the noise, was worse. I found them in the same dimly lit booth as before, huddled under the weak glow of a flickering light. The air smelled of stale coffee and rain. The place felt less like a hideout now and more like a war room for a losing battle. I slid into the booth, my shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's over, isn't it?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "She won. No one will believe us now." Claire's jaw was tight, her eyes burning with a frustration that matched my own. Her move was brilliant. I'll give her that. She's framed any evidence you present as the bitter lashing out of a disturbed daughter. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We have the financial records, but who's going to listen?" Marcus, who had been silent, leaned forward, his expression intense. We don't try to talk over her noise. We show them something that cuts right through it." He placed his laptop on the table and turned it toward me. "Your watcher sent another gift. It arrived about an hour after the doctored video hit the news." My heart skipped a beat. He pressed play. It was more security footage from the gala, but this was different. This was the raw, unedited feed. It showed everything. It showed my mother's mocking words, Ethan joining in, the full, shocking violence of the slap, the brutal way she yanked my hair. And clearest of all, it captured Ethan's voice, sharp and cruel, shouting, "You deserved it!" Followed by the dead, complicit silence of the 72 guests. It was the truth, ugly, painful, and undeniable. A sob escaped my lips, a sound that was half relief and half grief. Seeing the raw truth after being submerged in the lie was like coming up for air after nearly drowning. "The shadow," I breathed, my mind reeling. "They threatened me, but now they give us this? Why?" "Maybe they want you to fight back, but only on their terms," Marcus mused, his eyes on the screen. "They're not an ally. They're a puppet master. For now, we're the puppets they want to see win." Claire's eyes lit up, the calculating, strategic spark returning. She leaned over the laptop, her voice dropping to an excited, urgent whisper. "This is it. This is the key." She looked up at us, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "We don't release one thing, then the other. We don't give them time to spin a new narrative." She tapped the screen. "We hit them with everything at once." The plan came together in a furious rush of whispers and scribbled notes on napkins. We would give the unedited video to a trusted, independent journalist Marcus knew. At the exact same moment, Claire would file a lawsuit, attaching the bank records and the forged inheritance contract as evidence, making them public documents. It would be a two-pronged attack, one for the court of public opinion and one for the actual court of law, a media firestorm backed by an ironclad legal case. A surge of adrenaline, pure and powerful, washed away the last of my despair. The hope I felt wasn't fragile anymore. It was hard and sharp, forged in the heat of their attack. This wasn't just revenge, it's my freedom. It was about taking back my own story, my own name. "I've been pulling strings," Claire said, her smile turning predatory. "Calling in favors. The preliminary hearing is set. We have a court date." A court date. The words solidified everything, turning our desperate plan into a tangible reality. There was a finish line, a public square where the truth would finally be laid bare. I looked from Claire's determined face to Marcus's steady gaze, and I felt my spine straighten. I was no longer the girl cowering in the dark. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but now it was finally smaller than my resolve. They wanted a public war. Now they were going to get one. The morning of the court date, I woke up before the sun. The world outside my window was a soft, pre-dawn gray, quiet and still. It felt like the calm before a hurricane. I put on the suit Claire had told me to buy, a simple, dark gray outfit that felt like a costume. The fabric was stiff and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to my usual soft sweaters. Every part of me felt tense, coiled like a spring. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a declaration of war, and for the first time, I would be facing my mother on a battlefield that was supposed to be neutral. I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles white, and told myself to breathe. Today the truth would matter. Today the facts would finally speak for themselves. The courthouse was a modern monstrosity of concrete and glass, designed to feel imposing and impersonal. The air inside was cool and smelled of floor polish and anxiety. We walked through the echoing halls, our footsteps unnervingly loud to the assigned courtroom. When we pushed through the heavy wooden doors, my breath caught in my throat. They were already there. My mother, Evelyn, and my brother Ethan sat at the defendant's table, looking calm and untouchable. They were flanked by a team of at least 5 lawyers, all dressed in expensive, perfectly tailored suits. They looked like a row of sleek, well-fed sharks. Evelyn met my gaze from across the room, and a slow, confident smirk spread across her face. There was no fear in her eyes, only victory. Claire, Marcus, and I took our places at the plaintiff's table. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken hostility. Claire laid a reassuring hand on my arm, but I could feel a slight tremor in her fingers. The judge entered, a stern-faced older woman with sharp eyes. and the room fell silent. The proceedings began. Claire was magnificent. She stood before the judge, her voice clear and strong, and laid out our initial motions. She spoke of the forged inheritance contract, of the meticulously documented evidence of embezzlement, of the pattern of financial abuse. She was presenting a case that was, in her own words, ironclad. But the judge seemed unimpressed. She listened with a detached, almost bored expression, her fingers steepled before her. She kept cutting Claire off with procedural questions, siding with the objections from my mother's lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a smug, patronizing tone. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. Something was wrong. This wasn't a fair hearing. This was a stonewall. Then, during a heated exchange about the validity of the bank records, I saw Claire's face go pale. Her eyes were fixed on the judge. I saw a flicker of disbelief in her expression, quickly replaced by a look of dawning horror. She leaned toward me, her lips barely moving. "I know her," she whispered, her voice strained. "The judge. We were in a charity organization together years ago. She's one of your mother's oldest friends." The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It wasn't just a tough judge. It was a rigged game. My mother's influence wasn't just in boardrooms and PR firms. It was here, sitting on the bench, wearing a black robe. The final blow came swiftly. My mother's lawyer argued that the evidence was inflammatory and unsubstantiated, and requested a delay to review the defamatory accusations. A delay could take months, giving them time to bury the evidence and bleed us dry with legal fees. "I'm inclined to agree," the judge said, her voice devoid of emotion. "This court will grant a continuance. We will reconvene in 3 months to assess the validity of these claims." She slammed her gavel down, the sharp crack echoing the shattering of my hopes. 3 months. It was a lifetime. As the court adjourned and people began to file out, my mother walked past our table. She paused, leaning down as if to pick up her briefcase, her face just inches from mine. No one else could hear her. "You'll regret this, Sophia," she whispered, her voice a silken, venomous thread. It was the exact same tone she'd used when I was 12, and she found out I'd told a friend she'd forgotten my birthday. That night, she'd accidentally donated my favorite sketchbook, filled with a year's worth of drawings, to a charity drive. She never laid a hand on me then, but the message was clear. I will take away what you love. I felt a wave of helpless fury wash over me. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms, the small pain a focal point in my spiraling despair. They think they've won, but I'm not done. We walked out of the courthouse into the harsh, unforgiving sunlight, the 3 of us silent. The legal route, our righteous path, had been a dead end. "This is why the shadow sent the video," Marcus said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "They knew this would happen. They knew the system was compromised." He was right. We had tried to play by the rules of a game that was rigged against us from the start. The court of law was my mother's territory, but the court of public opinion, the one she had so expertly manipulated, was still in play. Defeated in the courtroom, I felt a new, reckless resolve hardening inside me. My mother wanted to fight her wars in the dark, using her influence and her money to crush me in silence, but I still had one weapon left, the one the shadow had given me, the unedited truth, and I was done waiting for a judge to let me use it. There was no strategy session after the courthouse. There was no more debate. We left the cold, sterile halls of justice and went back to my apartment. The injustice of the rigged system a bitter pill in our throats. The plan we'd made in the coffee shop, our desperate counterattack, was no longer a choice. It was the only move we had left. We were done playing by their rules. We gathered around my small kitchen table, the laptop open between us. The unedited video file was queued up. Outside, the city hummed along, oblivious. But inside my apartment, the air was electric with a terrifying, irreversible purpose. Marcus had his finger on the trackpad, his eyes on me, waiting for the final go-ahead. Claire stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of grim determination. This was the point of no return. Once we hit send, the world would change. I thought of my grandfather's promise, of my mother's slap, of the judge's dismissive gavel. I looked at the faces of the 2 people who had stood by me when the world turned its back. I gave Marcus a single, sharp nod. He clicked the button. The file uploaded. Sent. Gone. For a few minutes, there was only silence. The three of us just sat there breathing. It felt anticlimactic, like throwing a pebble into the ocean. Then, Marcus's contact, the independent journalist, sent a one-word reply. Live. Marcus refreshed the news site. And there it was. A new headline. Unedited footage of Bennett Gala incident emerges, contradicts official narrative. The screen was a blur of real-time reactions. The way he cheered, he's a monster. She assaulted her own daughter and the media helped her cover it up. This is undeniable. They lied, all of them. A wave of emotion so powerful it buckled. My knees washed over me. I remembered standing alone outside the gala, the sound of their laughter muffled behind the doors, feeling like the most hated person in the world. Now, strangers were defending me, fighting for me in a digital army. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back began to stream down my face, hot and cathartic. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was my sanity, my truth, and for the first time, I wasn't the only one who saw it. Then my phone, which had been silent for days, began to scream. It was Ethan. I flinched, my hand hovering over the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, it rang again, and again, and again. He was panicking. A minute later, a voicemail notification popped up. My hands shaking, I played it on speaker. Ethan's voice filled the room, no longer smug and confident, but high-pitched with frantic rage. "What did you do? What did you do? You're ruining everything. We need to fix this. Now!" The message ended with a string of curses and the sound of something smashing in the background. A cold chill cut through my emotional relief. The panic in his voice was terrifying. He was a cornered animal, and I knew him well enough to know he would lash out, blindly and destructively. "He's losing it," Marcus said, his voice low. "This is where it gets dangerous." Claire nodded, her eyes dark with concern. "Evelyn is a strategist. She'll be calculating her next move. But him? He's impulsive. He'll make a mistake, but he could do a lot of damage in the process." I looked back at the screen, at the wildfire we had started. This wasn't the clean, triumphant victory I had imagined. There was no sense of peace, no feeling of an ending. The truth is out. Now they'll fight dirtier. This public humiliation wouldn't make them surrender. It would make them desperate. And a desperate Bennett was 1,000 times more dangerous than a confident one. The battle was won, but the war had just entered a brutal, unpredictable new phase. I stared at the glowing screen, the wave of public support already feeling like a distant shore, and I was filled with a profound and chilling sense of dread. What desperate, terrible thing would they do next? The day after the unedited video ignited the internet, an unnatural silence fell. My family, usually so quick to retaliate, went dark. Evelyn and Ethan issued no statements. Their army of lawyers was quiet. The media storm raged on, now overwhelmingly in my favor, but the silence from my family was more unsettling than any public denial. It was the chilling quiet of a predator gathering itself to strike. The public battle might have turned in my favor, but I knew the war was far from over. I spent the day jumping at shadows, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that their response, when it came, would be devastating. The next morning, a sleek black courier envelope appeared on my doorstep. There was no sender, no return address, just my name typed in that same sterile font. My stomach clenched. It was from The Shadow. I took it inside, my hands surprisingly steady. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a burning need for answers. Inside was another single sheet of paper, with just 5 words that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I'm closer than you think." I thought back to the other notes. The first, a cryptic hint. She wasn't the only one. The second, a direct threat. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Then came the weapons, the financial records, the unedited video, and now this, a chilling, intimate declaration. What did it mean? Was it a promise or another threat? Was this person an ally, an enemy, or something else entirely? The ambiguity was maddening. I immediately called Marcus. His office was a cave of technological clutter, the only light coming from the glow of multiple monitors displaying maps, security feeds, and lines of code. The air smelled of ozone and cold pizza. It was the nerve center of our tiny rebellion. I placed the note on his desk, the white paper looking stark against the dark, messy surface. He read it, his expression hardening. "They're enjoying this," he said, his voice a low growl. "They're playing a game with all of us." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in protest. "I've been digging, thinking about who benefits from all this chaos. At first, I thought it might be someone inside the company, someone with a grudge against your mother. But this level of sophistication, the timing, it feels bigger than that." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Have you considered that the shadow might not be a family member or an employee? It could be a corporate rival." The idea hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had been so focused on the betrayals within my own family that I never considered the possibility of an outside player, a rival company, another powerful CEO, someone who would benefit from the complete implosion of Bennett Innovations. "Someone playing both sides," I whispered, the words from our first meeting coming back to me. "Exactly," Marcus said. "They give you the weapons to tear down your mother's empire from the inside, all while they watch from a safe distance, ready to pick up the pieces. It's a brilliant, ruthless strategy." My mind raced. If this was true, then I wasn't a player in my own revenge story. I was a pawn in a much larger corporate war. The thought was deeply unsettling. Was my pain just a tool for someone else's gain? "I've been scrubbing weeks of security footage," Marcus continued, turning to one of his monitors. "From the cameras across the street from your old office. I was looking for anyone who didn't belong, anyone watching the building." He brought up a video file. "I found something. From the night you got the first threatening note, the one that mentioned the Watcher." He pressed play. The footage was grainy, taken from a long distance. It showed the street outside the Bennett Innovations headquarters. It was late, the street mostly deserted. He zoomed in on a figure standing in the shadows of a recessed doorway, directly across from the entrance. The person was wearing a dark coat and a hat, their features completely obscured. We watched as the figure stood there for nearly an hour, motionless, just watching. Then, they turned and calmly walked away, melting back into the shadows of the city. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding, desperately trying to make out a face, a gesture, anything familiar. But there was nothing. The figure was a complete mystery. Their height, their build, their gender, all impossible to determine. They were just a ghost, a shadow. I felt a profound sense of vertigo. All this time I had been fighting a war against my mother and brother, a deeply personal battle for my own freedom and future. But this grainy, anonymous figure on the screen changed everything. This suggested a different war entirely, one I knew nothing about, run by a faceless general who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. I stared at the frozen image of the shadowy figure, 1,000 questions swirling in my mind. Is this ally or enemy? And why help me now? My fight for justice? My quest for revenge? Was it all just a carefully orchestrated move in someone else's chess game? The victory I thought I was approaching suddenly felt hollow, a prelude to a revelation that might be more devastating than anything my own family had ever done to me. Who was this person? Who had been pulling the strings all along? Staring at the grainy image of the figure in the shadows, I finally understood. My fight for justice had been a storm, but the shadow was the invisible current that had directed its path. They weren't just a watcher. They were a ghostwriter of my revenge, and their motives were the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. We had one last move to make, and we had to trust that the mysterious puppet master wanted the same outcome we did. With the world now watching, we pushed for an emergency hearing. The public outcry over the unedited video and the embezzlement leak was so immense that the compromised judge recused herself, and a new hearing was set. This time, there would be no backroom deals. This time, it would be a public execution. The day of the final hearing was bright and clear. The courthouse, once a place of silent, oppressive power, was now surrounded by a swarm of news vans and reporters, their cameras pointed like a firing squad. As we walked up the steps, a path cleared for us. The whispers I heard were no longer of condemnation, but of support. I saw my mother and Ethan arrive, hustled through a side entrance by their lawyers. They looked haggard, their impeccable facades finally cracked. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a pale, brittle fury. They looked like ghosts haunting their own downfall. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled. The atmosphere was electric. Claire, Marcus, and I sat at our table, a quiet island of calm in the storm. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound and strange sense of stillness, as if I had finally reached the eye of the hurricane that had been my life. The new judge, a no-nonsense man with a reputation for integrity, was swift. Our evidence was presented. The unedited video played for the court, the forged contract, the undeniable trail of embezzled funds. My mother's lawyers offered a weak, rambling defense, but it was useless. The facts were a tidal wave that swept away their lies. Then came the verdict. The judge looked down, not at us, but at my mother. His voice was cold and clear, ringing through the silent courtroom. In light of the overwhelming evidence of financial malfeasance, fraud, and corporate misconduct, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Sophia Bennett. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Effective immediately, the assets of Bennett Innovations are frozen and the Bennett empire is dissolved. Dissolved. The word was so simple, so final. I felt the tension leave my body in a single shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for my entire life. Across the room, I saw my mother's face crumble, the mask of control shattering into a million pieces, revealing the bitter, defeated woman beneath. Ethan just stared blankly ahead, a hollowed-out shell of the golden boy he once was. It was over. We walked out onto the courthouse steps, blinking in the bright daylight. The crowd erupted in cheers. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. As Claire and Marcus shielded me from the barrage of microphones, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and a woman in an elegant dark suit stepped out. She was the CEO of our biggest corporate rival, a name I'd only ever seen in business journals. She approached us, her expression unreadable. "A remarkable outcome," she said, her voice calm and polished. She looked directly at me. "You were very brave." My heart stopped. I knew, with absolute certainty, who she was. "The shadow," I breathed. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "My company has been trying to acquire Bennett Innovations for years, but your mother's corruption made it impossible. I knew of her crimes, but I lacked the standing to expose them. You, however, had the standing, the motive, and the personal history to make the world listen." She opened her hand, revealing a small new USB drive. "These are the originals of everything I sent you. My gift to you for my company's future. I simply cleared the path. You were the one who had the courage to walk it." She handed the drive to Claire, gave me one last assessing look, and then got back in her car, disappearing into traffic as quickly as she had appeared. It was the final piece. I wasn't her pawn, I was her unwitting partner. She had used my fight to win her war, but in doing so, she had given me my freedom. After the crowd dispersed and my allies had gone to celebrate, I remained on the steps alone, the warm sun on my face. For so long, I believed that freedom was something you ran toward, an escape from the shadows of your past. But I see now that isn't true. Freedom comes from facing your demons, not running from them. It's about turning around, walking back into the darkness, and choosing to turn on the light yourself. A real smile, my own smile, finally reached my lips. I'm finally me. No more shadows. I took a deep breath of the free air and walked down the steps, ready to begin my own story. Have you ever had to stand up to your family or fight for a truth no one else believed? Let me know your story in the comments below. Please like and subscribe and share this with someone you know who needs the strength to face their own battle. Be sure to check out our next story coming soon.